How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Legion's Lounge. I'm your host, Matt, joined by CEO of Future Lore Studios and creator of Legion's Realms at War, Taylor. How's it going tonight?
And going good, man. It's our third one in a row back, and I'm glad everyone's tuning in to listen. I know at the time of recording this, we were recording it pre Gen Con, but for everyone listening to it, this is your first podcast for the Legion's Lounge post Gen Con. So fingers crossed that future me and future team does really well, or did really well, and that we netted some more curious eyes, curious minds, and brought more light to legions. But today we're going to talk about some new perspectives from a new and awesome community member who's been very active both in person in the Kingston area, but also someone who's been very active online playing in our Legions League. So I know this is going to be a very exciting time and a lot to talk about. So without further ado, we're going to bring in James. James, how is it going this evening?
Thank you. It's a wonderful evening. I'm happy to be here. Was super excited when you asked me to come on, being such a new member of the community and everything. So I'm no, definitely glad to be here.
Great to have you, man. So, there is a lot to talk about, so I think we should probably start with a bit of Gen Con just to give a little bit of preface. So, just as for me, so Gen Con is larger than Fan Expo, correct?
Gen Con is, yes. In fact, Gen Con is the largest gaming expo in the world. So, and it's what I mean by gaming expo is specifically for tabletop games, board games, trading card games. So it's not your typical like an EGLX or anything that is PAX or anything like that. That is typically geared towards digital media. This is all in person and tabletop card games and such. So I know there's been a lot of hype around Gen Con this year specifically, given the fact that Ravensburger Games is going to be releasing Disney's Lorcana at Gen Con this year. So we're very excited as our small, humble Canadian company to not only get accepted, but also to be gifted even a double large booth that's 20 foot wide by 14 feet tall. And trust us, just like we put out great graphics um, eh, if you haven't seen pictures yet, when this video goes live or when this recording goes live, I'm sure you should get a chance to look at those and see those. Ryan and I will have video logged a lot of the trip and a lot of the journey, um, but you should check those out on social media after listening to this podcast because we're going to present really well, and I think Legis is gonna show America what Canada has to offer when it comes to trading card games.
So, if you don't mind, what's the process of getting into Gen Con? Like, how does that happen?
The process, yeah. So, especially a con the size of Gen Con is unlike any other convention, really. There's a lot of them. Like I said, I mentioned before, we have like EGLX, PAX Unplugged, Gamma. You got San Diego Comic Con. You got Collecticons that travel around. They like Dallas, Fort Worth, and Charlotte and Florida. Then there's like the TCG cons that travel around. Then we have the fan expos both in Canada and the United States. So there's a lot of cons, a lot of different conventions. Some are tailored towards gaming, some are tailored more towards pop culture and media. Um, so there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of cons and different places to go to. But Gen Con is a different beast all in itself. Because it is the biggest one, it attracts the most attention. It's also the hardest to get in. If you think about it, it's similar to like a university application. You can apply to a college university, but if you're wanting to get into like the Ivy Leagues, you gotta present the best. You gotta have the best grades. You gotta be the most standout individual, right? And it was a long shot for us. We're a small community, a small company out of Canada, and we've only had a product out for just under 2 years now. But we've made some ripples. We made some waves. Some people know us. Some people may think we're still obscure. Some people might not even heard our name yet. But Gen Con changes things. It has a different perspective on things, and the committee at GenCon, when it came to the application process, looked at what we had to offer, looked at our entire displays from prior cons. When we went to London Comic Con, the Universal Summit for LGSs and distribution, and then obviously our big Fan Expo Toronto display as well. They saw that what we can offer and what we can present, and ultimately a lot of these show creators and operators, they want their shows to look the best and present the best, right? So why not bring in a company who pulls out all the stops, right? So I think that's part of the reason why they gave us the double booth. And you know, and like I said, when you're listening to this, it'll be already be post Gen Con, so I'm sure we blew the doors off the thing. So uh, yeah, the whole process in itself though is the application is pretty steep. It's pretty fierce. You got to book in advance, and not just like a couple months or a couple weeks. You know, for Gen Con, it was a year in advance.
Oh
Just
wow.
to get the application started. So we had to apply a year in advance, jump through a lot of hoops, fill out a lot of paperwork. It is international, so we got to deal with United States customs as well. Um, and just that whole process of, you know, back and forth, and then waiting to hear if you make the cut, and then they offer, okay, this is what we can offer you, what can we do, how do we work it out, then trying to work out booth size and what gets approved for height and width and what we can take down and what can cross the border. And there's a lot of moving pieces, and then of course there's the big price tag attached to it as well, right? And what I mean by big price tag is us being a Canadian company. um, when you have to pay in American dollars, it's a bigger price tag than you're used to. So um, doing this whole trip is not without expense. um, but that's the cost of growing a company and the cost of exposure, and you know, we're in it for the long haul.
Well, exactly, and it's that I think that's part of it, right? It's not a risk in a sense, but it's you have to put something in to get something back, right?
Exactly. We're in a situation and a field, a business type, a business model that exposure is so key, right? The more people that know about us, the more word of mouth travels. You know, we can do all of the hard work on the background and produce great product and produce great sets and beautiful artwork and, you know, high level card quality and great pack algorithms and everything. But it falls on deaf ears or on blind eyes if if no one gets to see it or no one gets to experience it, right? So we need to do our best. Social media only reaches so far when your circle's so small, and so it's about growth. It's about trying to reach that critical mass and as many people as possible to get the product in front of their eyes. And what better place to do that than the largest gaming convention in the world?
Oh, exactly. And I think there's props that needs to be given for even getting into Gen Con, right? And I think the thing that's very important is the people that go to Gen Con are very open-minded from what I can imagine.
Yeah, and that's a big thing too, right? Is that it's a difficult process, and there's a lot of games. And you know, we talked about it on the podcast, and I know a lot of people have witnessed it. There's been an insane rise of new games in the past year and a half, um, and a lot of them that got funded into the millions on Kickstarter, or ones that got a big hype cycle or got into big distribution or made it on TCG Player, and all of those games, none of them are at Gen Con, but we made it.
Exactly. I think there's a lot to be said
So
there, right? You have
yeah, so
to. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, speaking of that, you know, we're talking about like what we can do for new products, what we can do for new players and exposure, and opening the door to getting more people on board. Uh, we did that with our buddy James here on the podcast. So I think that I think it's time to turn it over to him here a little bit and get a new player perspective from humble roots here in Canada, but that new player perspective of jumping into a game in year two, jumping in right around, you know, within months of a new set release. James, walk us through that experience. What attracted you to Legions? What uh, what did you like about it? What what did the community feel like to you, and how was it being part of of a new product launch. James, you there with us? Oh, I believe we lost him there, Matt.
That is all right. We will push forward.
Yep.
All right. Uh,
So you got
so
anything for me in the meantime right now while we get James back on here?
let's see here. What are we thinking? Let's talk about Empires for a little bit.
All right.
What's your favorite deck out of Empires?
Favorite deck out of Empires? I think ultimately Empires gave us a fresh viewpoint on some things. It's been a set that's been a long time coming.
Yep.
And it's, we talked about it in length in person and some on the podcast that Empires was the set that the game needed. It was the one that really, we weren't in a stalemate quite yet, but we were moving towards that with only having the 8 playable warlords, and there's only so many deck variations you could tweak with even with the newer sets. So Empires really opened the gates to that. Not only introducing the 8 new warlords, but courtesy of the Kickstarter, a 9th as well with Marianas. So I think like not only opening that aspect and having so many more deck building opportunities is we found ourselves in a unique position at the fact that Empires doubled the game, like it doubled the size of the game.
Exactly. This is
So
the way that I think about Empires is it's like you've completed the tutorial. Now you get to unlock the full game. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean?
I think that's a really cool way of looking at it. I hadn't looked at it like that before. But yeah, it's like we walked you through the tutorial. You journey through the ravaged lands. You got a chance to stop in the bountiful harvest to restock up a little bit, and then you come back to the fog of war being lifted in frontiers, and Empires now is the meat and the potatoes. This is the game that you signed up for, right? So
Exactly. So, but
so I think to
what's
answer
your favorite deck?
well, my favorite deck, yeah, I was gonna say to answer your question, I think that it's hard to say because as a creator, you try and make everything balanced, right? You try and make everything fair.
Exactly.
And with the 8 original warlords, and now with Empires concluding some of their story arcs, we've had 4 products to flush out the original 8 warlords and to really solidify their place in not just the metagame but in the storyline, and to give them their cards necessary to make their decks competitive. So I think now Empires, there's a lot of favorites. I think there's a lot of people are starting to still shaking it out and picking sides and what they think. And I've noticed a lot of people jumping ship from legions they used to play to legions now they now want to play because these new warlords have opened up possibilities for legions they wouldn't even have looked at otherwise. So I think that that's been huge for the game. So to answer your question in a roundabout way, I don't really have a favorite. Me, I've been a long time player of dwarves when I can.
Mhm.
But
There's that.
as much as the ale house looks great and plays great, and I'm very excited for what it brings to the game. It's not necessarily my play style, but there's some decks there that I think are going to make some noise specifically when we push forward into Opus the Magi and beyond.
Exactly.
James, do we have you back?
All right. Let's keep pushing on for
I
a little
was
bit more.
I was gonna say I heard him, but we're having
So,
some technical difficulties on his end.
yeah. So I very much agree with that, right? I'm sticking with dwarves. Dwarves I always have, right? I'll jump between things, but I always play dwarves, and then I've been looking at Sholara as well as Gaia potentially. Gaia just seems interesting. I feel it does what I want Putrid to do better in a sense.
Okay, and what exactly is that?
Well, I
Are
feel
you
like
guys
it.
able to hear me now?
Yeah,
We can hear you now, James. You're back.
Perfect.
All right, awesome.
so just to finish off
So
my little thought there, I think
yeah,
like Gaia, Putrid, I was looking for more of a heavy lockdown style.
I think I've lost again.
So you some heavy lockdown, yeah, and I think that's where Putrid at right now obviously falls short. They don't have all of their pieces yet. Like I was just saying, like we had 4 sets to flush out the original 8 warlords. So obviously these guys are going to be getting more support as time goes on for the new 8, right? So I think that's going to be a big thing um, going forward. But I think Gaia, in case of Gaia versus Malady, I think Gaia's a little more fleshed out, and I think you'd probably agree in that situation.
I very much agree. I think Gaia is a little more competitively viable in this current meta.
As someone who plays Putrid, I can definitely say that it's missing some cards.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's in a position right now where Malady's made an appearance, but she's not quite where she needs to be quite yet. But she is a very important character in the storyline, and she will gain momentum as time goes on.
But I also have my deck set up in a way that if it catches you by surprise, it's a pain in the butt to deal with because I'm not afraid to play the Howl of Trinity Moon, which blocks off like 9 slots on the opposing player's side of the field.
Yeah, see, that's an awesome tech choice. Like to think about using the onset of some of these potential werewolf cards to come in the future. Or, our little nod and tease to Masquerade the Macabre, but to have them included in a flag style deck like Malady, that's a really awesome insight there, James. And now that we have you back on the horn and back fully functioning here with no more technical difficulties, hopefully they're all behind us. I think we can go into that root question I asked you in the beginning, being a new player, and like you were just talking about there with deck building, this being your first Legion set release, after only being a couple months into the game yourself and playing in person and now playing online. How does it feel? How does it feel to be part of the community, the online community, the in-person community? What Cody's been able to build there in Kingston, and how does it feel to be jumping into a new game and being part of a new set release so soon?
Yeah, so I definitely what drew me in was definitely the community. I've known Cody most of our lives. We grew up together. He's the same age as my brother. Um, and so that's what drew me in first. And everyone I've met in the community, both in person, online, are all great people. Um, there's never there's never a bad time. There's never any like fighting about the games. There's never any, there's no gatekeeping. There's no one that tries to make you feel stupid because you're a new player. There is none of that at all. And sometimes you do get that because sometimes people don't have enough patience for new players. Not all the time, but you do get sometimes. So I was really impressed that there was none of that at all. It was a very welcoming community. Um, and and we've managed to have a great place to play at the Legion here in Kingston, which has been a great time. And then, but getting in because so many of us started together in Kingston, I found that like we really had time to grow our knowledge of the game without having just one person that was better than everyone. So I definitely think it helps when you have a group of people joining together, not just an individual.
That's actually a really good point. Yeah, it's not something we normally run into, and you know it's hard to look back at that because we've grown the pods that we have, the pods of players, and it is exact that way that you're talking about. They all kind of grew together. Now, obviously, some rise a little higher than others due to more time spent, or they grasp things a little differently, or have a different learning curve on things. But that's a really cool insight to see because we're a year and a half, almost 2 years removed from that. So this is the exact reason why bringing a new player on the podcast and talking about this. That's a really awesome insight, and I think that's something really good for our listeners to hear about community growth and growing together as one.
Yeah, I think it's been really good, especially for us here in Kingston. And it's really like when you look at the group of people that we've got, there's, most of us have lived in Kingston or Gananoque or Napanee or Amherst, like the immediate surrounding area, our whole lives. And still it's like five different friend groups that never knew each other, never met each other. And we're all roughly the same age too. Like we're all in that kind of like 30 to like mid 20s to like higher 30, 40 range for the most part. Um, so like it's literally just like people that never would have met otherwise.
So that's pretty cool. It's like Legions became almost like a common language that gave you a reason to come together, and as a result, um, because you at least shared a one similar interest, it allowed a friend group to form and great minds to meet where they wouldn't otherwise because they come from different walks of life.
Exactly. And I think that's something that I think we talk about it a lot because it's surreal and it's something that you have to appreciate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's really important because for for new players and new communities starting up, right? Like that's the that's walking the fine line. That's what we have to do. And I know we talked about it a little more in length with during Cody's podcast with Booster House. There is that you know keeping that front door open for players as wide and as open as possible, because you want to eliminate the barrier to entry as much as possible. And whether that's financially, whether that's availability of product, whether that's a place to play, or whether that's just great people and great minds coming together, and um, very thoughtful people, very sincere and not malicious in any way. And I think James has been a benefactor of and a very important part of that perfect storm, let's say, of a great place to play, great attitude of people, and a great common language that you can come together with, and under one banner. You know what I mean? What do you feel about that, James?
I believe we might have lost him again.
Oh, I believe we lost him again.
That is all right. We will keep pushing forward, I believe. May you repeat the question?
Oh, oh, yeah, I think we lost him there briefly. So like that's important too. I think like I know Matt, you're more than a year in, but I
It's still
feel
weird to say, man. It does
it
not
does.
feel like a year.
Trust me, when we're like I said, this podcast is being recorded prior to Gen Con, so we've been crushing in these last couple days getting ready for this event, and we were looking at it and it's like, wow, we have done a lot in 2 years. Like we've come a long way, and it's pretty crazy to say that. It's pretty crazy to just take a moment because you're always having your head down, you're working on the next thing. It's just like you look back and like look at how far we've come, right? And you can't spend too much time looking in the rearview mirror because that's not the direction you're headed. But I think it's important to note is to take that time and see like 2 years in and we're still standing. We're still pushing and we're still growing, and that's crucial. I mean, a lot of games can't say that.
No,
So
exactly.
I know with you being a year in already, Matt, like, did you have that same kind of experience that James had? That obviously you jumped in at a different time, and it's it's weird because you jumped in and it was more of uh, already kind of established, or at least the roots were
Yeah, it
established.
was it was interesting because I don't feel like I needed to play catch up in a sense, but I feel like I needed to work a little bit harder to get myself situated into the meta. Whereas I feel with Empires, it's like right now even still is the perfect time to join because no one has any clue about the meta, right? Like it's sure the people that have played before are gonna have like a slight advantage in just knowing how the game works, but we still don't know the meta yet.
So where do you feel the meta is going? And like I know when I'm looking at it, we're keeping track of all these different pods and these different players, and like James has been a very a key cog in that, both online. I mean, he's played. I'm looking at the Legions League report here from season 3, and he's at 13 games played so far in this season, right?
Jeez.
And he's taken his knocks, right? But he's also won a few here, and he's starting to pick up momentum. And so, where do you think we're at keeping tabs on some of these other games and other these communities? We're seeing a lot of Empires Warlords crop up outside of the playing community that you're a part of, Matt. And I know the playing community that you're a part of is still very much tied to the OG Warlords.
We very
So
much are.
where so how do you find, like, is it going to be something that it takes going to take a new player to break that mold, or is it going to be something that is more it's going to take some turning or changing of minds
I
of
think
existing players?
I think it'll take a new player to, at least to begin with, a new player or someone open to change, right? Everyone hates change. It's just like human fact. So it's I think it's going to take someone new who's, to them it's not changing, it's what they want to do, or someone who is exploring their options in terms of the other warlords. Maybe someone who never really found what fit for them for the original 8, right? Maybe someone wanted to play effect damage, but the closest thing they had to effect damage was Burn Forge or like mask cycling. And I think it's gonna take. I think Marianas is gonna be a like league of her own in a sense, something that we don't necessarily need to group in with the Empire's Warlords. But I think it's gonna take definitely some new people potentially to realize the new power and potential in the newer warlords, because the way that I see it, the people who have played the game, especially the testing team, right? Which is why I think some of the my local area is very tied down to the old warlords, is because they tested it all, right? So they've had a lot longer to brew with these combos, whereas they haven't had as long to brew with the
With the
with the
new
new
ones.
ones, yeah. And I think it's
Yeah.
that the new ones may be potentially stronger, but a good deck is only good if you pilot it well. So
Okay.
I think you have to kind of break down your old walls and style maybe to get used to a new warlord.
So you'd say that we in that community where you play, it's kind of like for lack of better words, it's already starting to form an old guard,
In a
right?
sense. In a sense,
Like they're set in their ways. Obviously I think they're all still trying to feel out the new Empire meta, and like James was talking about, I think like Malady is still missing a few pieces. Obviously,
oh,
it's only the
100%.
first set that she has stuff for. So maybe the Empire's warlords are still needing to fill themselves out. I mean, we're not that far from release yet, so we give it 30, give it 60 days, and see. Like I said, the Kingston community I've been keeping tabs on. Cody and I have been talking back and forth. Um, they have a lot of Malady players there, surprisingly,
Well, I mean, something
and
they need to think about is how long have they had to brew combos from Ravaged Lands to the release of Empires,
that's true. That's true. Yeah,
right?
and then that's
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I think that's important to note, right? Like just the time, right?
Exactly.
It's not just so much the card pool, but it's the time spent on those on the original 8, and like, is it going to take the same amount of time spent on these new 8? And then
There we go.
and James is back, right on. So we're avoiding more and more technical difficulties as we go along here, but like we do, we always push forward, whether that's in a player base, in a game, even when you're behind, you can always play catch up. So James, welcome back.
Thank you.
So Matt and I were just talking about how as a new player, um, you like going just basically spinning off what you were saying about you basically grew and developed as a player base together. You know, Matt didn't necessarily have that luxury. He jumped in and had a little bit already had to had uphill battle against the old guard. You know, like that we had already had starting to form the players who had already been playing for almost a year before he joined in. So it can you give us a little more feedback there, James, about that new player experience, but growing as a group, growing as a collective?
Yeah, I definitely think one of the things it's done is it's created everyone wants to be creative with their deck. Everyone's trying to find that, that one thing about their deck that no one else has thought about yet. So I think there's been a lot of creativity. We also come from multiple different um card game backgrounds. So there's a lot of th- there's a lot of new mechanics in regards to how the resource is used because your resource is also your health in most cases.
Yeah.
So we've really been growing with that, and I think at first, because that was kind of a new mechanic for a lot of us, we really didn't um use our health. Like we really tried to stick with a lot of decks. Like in Kingston, you saw a lot of hero wins the first few weeks. Um, because they had a lot of cards that didn't damage yourself to play. But you're starting to see people come up with more interesting ways on how to play their decks, on how to damage themselves, heal themselves at the same time. And just a lot of, and we're starting to see a lot of empires play as well, which I think might possibly be even earlier to see for us than a lot of other places because we don't have that, year or 2 year history before Empires was released of playing with our current decks.
Yeah, and that's what Matt and I were kind of referring to. I think that's really huge. And if you can give us more perspective on that, like I think you're right on the front lines there of experiencing like almost like a trial by fire with with Empire's cards. It's the most raw data coming in, and I think you guys are the epicenter of that growth with the new set and new warlords, and don't have any outside fingerlings coming in of the old guards. So walk us through what are some of these decks from Empires you're seeing. What are some of these things that maybe you're experiencing yourself in games, or that you're trying out, or maybe that you see other people doing?
So you're actually seeing a lot of Putrid. Putrid is really popular. Um, the Putrid Malady combo. There's myself and two others that are currently building and um, working towards playing Putrid decks, especially since we know there's a competitive tournament coming up in the next few months in Ontario, and hopefully in the Kingston area, but at least in the Ontario area. So there's a lot of us that want to play in some of those. And you're actually starting to see a number of the new heroes as well. The Hood. There's a couple of people playing that. And we're getting a nice mix because you're still seeing you're still seeing a Titan player with the original Prometheus. As you know, that kind of original meta, we still have that being played. There's still people playing the statue heroes and the boar orcs. But we also have someone playing Dux Fox now, which is a completely different kind of orc deck. It's actually kind of more similar to how the original demons ran than the original orcs. With the fact that they steal and whatnot. So you're starting to see a lot of different combinations. You're starting to see a lot of different things that decks can do. Now that we're that kind of couple weeks, people have had time to look over and start to build their decks from the Empire's cards. And I think because we didn't have the pre-release, like we didn't have the Ravage Lands or the Frontiers released in Kingston ourselves, this is kind of the first set that everyone bought boxes from.
Yeah, I know in our conversation with Cody, he said he sold out in 30 minutes. And so I'm sure, like, how is that? So speaking of that, like, you yourself, I believe you said you got a couple boxes. Like, how is that? How is the box opening experience? Was it exciting to open this product? How did it feel to be part of that part of the release?
So I was definitely excited. I was like a kid in a candy shop. I ripped through my boxes like I had my cards open before most people even got there. Um, I can definitely say that there really wasn't any bad packs because by the time you got, I was lucky enough I pulled an Exalted in each box I opened. And so by the time you opened an Exalted, 3 Renowns, the Revolution card, the Sketch card, um, there was, one of each of the Bounty Hunters, which are nice looking cards, and I think they're going to find a lot more use in decks and sideboards as people realize how to play them. And so yeah, so I think because of that, the packs were put together well enough that there was never any pack that you looked at and you're like, I'm disappointed with this pack. Every pack had something in it.
I think that's probably the best part, right? I remember when I was opening my loose packs, I was getting like a foil every other pack. Like it was crazy. It was very enjoyable as well.
Yeah, we actually had someone well, 2 people last night. One opened the one of one the that extremely rare undead warlord.
Oh, the
Oh,
Alistair.
the Elysian,
Yeah,
yeah, not the 101, but yeah, the Elysian,
the Elysian. Yeah, sorry, the
yeah.
Elysian. And then we had someone open up a um an even rarer exalted from Ravage Lands. So like one of the like one in or well not rarer, but still like rarer than the exalteds from Empires.
Exactly.
In just a single pack.
Damn,
Awesome.
it's amazing.
And I know that's something that Cody said. He says obviously from a retailer point of view, he says he can see the change in the consumer and the players that feel better about uh, picking up a loose pack here or there, as opposed to feeling compelled or needing to buy a box because of the way the hit ratios were. He said that he found that Empires was one of those like good to the last drop kind of thing where it doesn't matter what kind of things got opened prior in the box, every pack would sell out right to the end because every pack opening experience felt like it had something to offer.
I found that honestly, I don't know that there was a pack where like when you look at just the pure value of the cards, the collectability, the playability of the cards that you got, I don't really know that there was a pack that I would ever have considered having lost money on. Like I think every pack had the value of a pack or more. Like when you look at the cost of the cards and stuff, just speaking from a strictly cost perspective, or when you look at the playability of the cards that you got, like I've built my Malady deck on almost completely rare and under. The only renown I have in the deck is the Guardian.
Well, of course. I mean, I think Bella's an
And
absolute
that
need. Not need, but it's
Yeah, and that Belladonna that Matt was just referring to there, the undead guardian, like, did you feel like you had to hunt for her, or was she relatively like easy to obtain for you?
No, so I would say relatively easy. Like I opened 2 boxes, got 3 Guardians.
Mhm.
I kind of based on what I was going to do on the cards I got. So the Belladonna was one of the Guardians I got. So that's partly why I went with Putrid. But when you're getting like I don't think there was a single person that got a box and didn't get a Guardian in it.
And from a
So
community
really
that
when
wasn't in the
you're,
game early, right?
yeah,
That's huge because I know that that was one of the potentially contentious issues was the lack of guardians in the Kingston area. So did Empires mitigate that?
yeah, oh, completely. Everyone has guardians now. And even the ones that didn't have their original guardian has been able to trade one of their Empire's guardians for the guardian they wanted. So yeah, I think the only one that doesn't use a guardian now is Conrad, who's the younger kid that plays with us. A really funny guy, but yeah, I think he's about the only one that doesn't have a guardian, and that's because he's the kid and didn't open a whole box.
Yeah.
Which is understandable.
So I caught a word in your sentence there, in what you were saying that I think is something really important to highlight there, James, is you use the concept of the word trading. Now, a lot of times, often we forget because we either open by the box or by the case, or we buy singles or buy singles from people or from online or from retailers. Um, we often forget about the T in the trading card game, the trading aspect. How has Empires in your area? How has trading become a thing? And is it a thing? Did Empires inspire more trading?
So I don't know that Empires inspired more trading. What I think really inspires the trading in our group is Cody himself, because Cody will tell you, like if he notices someone has opened up a card that you want, he'll be like, "Hey, JW, this one just opened up the. I was looking for the Mount Finger synergy for my Frost control deck." And so as soon as someone opened it, Cody was like, "Hey, this Mount Finger right here." And I ended up buying that card off Josh, but I bought it right away. Um, Cody tries to facilitate, us looking for trades as much as he does buying singles from himself. Um, and so I think that's something unique that we have because we're um because even though Cody is trying to run a business, it's not a brick and mortar game shop. It really is a community that he's built. It's a bunch of friends that have got together. We kind of get a slightly different mentality on the actual purchasing from him, where he's like, no, look for a trade first, and then if you can't, come to me and we'll talk business. Um, and so yeah, so it's really that encouragement that I think has helped us keep that in the game. And then because so much stuff was opened from Empires, everyone's been, just swapping a lot of us opened one or two boxes, so we've been swapping the one or two, common or uncommon extra cards that each person has to make the three that you need for your deck. And I think it's just the community that's really brought that on as much as the actual release. And I think it was, but I think what the release did was it helped because we now have the cards in the area to swap around.
Yeah, like I said, I think there's a perfect storm there, and Cody definitely, I think Cody definitely spearheaded that. And like you said, I think that's a very unique experience that you have there. Is someone who doesn't necessarily have a brick and mortar store, so the overhead isn't as high, um, but really wanting to facilitate community growth. And I think that's what makes a community champion. That's what makes our, like, we're proud to say, a Legion's ambassador. One that doesn't necessarily want it for the quick buck, wants to see the growth, wants to have fun with his friends, and wants to and is consistently looking at the long game. And that's where I myself, and the other members of Featureless Studios, we can really appreciate that, because that's how we envision things. That's how we look. When we make a decision, one of the first questions we ask ourselves here in studio is, how is that going to affect us 3 to 5 years from now? right? Because for those that are short-sighted, you make a rash decision and then it affects you down the road, and now you have to make a dramatic change because you veered off course so early. And I think that Cody sees that and respects that we do that, and he's just the kind of guy that does that same thing, that sees the long game, sees the growth, and sees that if he keeps nurturing the community and supports you guys that support him as well, and you work as that, like we've mentioned on a podcast previously, you work as that family unit, that village to raise a family. It goes a long way, and it fosters more and more growth, um, to a point where we're excited to see the direction you guys are headed in.
It definitely does, and I definitely think that starts from the top. I that's how you are. That's the kind of people you've attracted around you, and in turn, those people attract more people who want the community growth, right? So I think it's really something that's come down from the top. I know the night you and Paul were in Kingston, um, it was absolutely wonderful to have you guys around. We got a nice look at the Empires on the Rise, the what 2 weeks before release or so, 3 weeks I think it was, um, with those foil sheet cards that you brought down. And so yeah, it was. I really think it's just something that it has been a natural organic growth. It's not just like it's no one's tried to force it. It's just happened.
Yeah, and that's the best part. We spoke that on the last podcast about creating an ecosystem, because it's more than just commerce. It's more than just business. Um, you know, I want to be as long as I possibly can, be part of the community as a whole, be part of that ecosystem, and have the ability to have a player reach out to me and personally give me feedback. And I have the time to, when I can, to work one-on-one with somebody, or whether it's in a large Discord chat that we do sometimes after you guys are done playing a game online. You know, um, in a situation like that, what other games really offer you that, right? Like, and what other communities offer that to a company, right? I think that's an invaluable resource, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, you're buying the cards, you're enjoying your time, you're spending your time, and you're having a fun time enjoying your hobby. Um, but also, you're giving us and myself critical feedback, um, that allows us to make quicker pivots, that allows us to immediately implement that into the next product release, or make some tweaks when it comes to events and stuff like that. I think that's huge, having that relationship one on one that you don't get with a lot of other games, because they're so far removed, or they're such a Goliath that you can't have that direct conversation.
Yeah, and you don't see that with any other gaming community. From what I've seen, like you don't see the top the people who make the decisions in Magic or Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh aren't speaking with their average players, right? Um, so you and you didn't see that in any other games that I saw, even right from the beginning. Um, through my time growing up playing. Now, I obviously didn't play at the start of Magic because that was a little bit older than um, the age group where I started playing games, but I started at the very start of Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh. I collected, especially. I was a fan of the games and the shows, and you didn't see that it was just like they were just there for themselves, and the communities were kind of a bonus, but each player had to do that themselves. It was just a player. Um, Here you really see the community, like I said, comes from the top. It's through the even the stores that have gone big with it. I know you guys play a lot at um a group at Nerds, a group at Atlas, like even the store groups that have got into Legion, I find are different than any other group, any other card groups that I've ever been a part of before. Um, and I've never felt anything except welcomed through the Discord chat with, with guys who have been literally as long as what the game's been released. Some of your guys who are play testers and stuff. People like Pat, who's never hesitate to jump on and show us, some crazy combo that you can do in the deck, that no one thought of before. Right. So it's been fun, and it really helps the growth with all the new players when you have people already in the community who are willing to welcome you in like that as well.
Yeah, I think that's it's kind of like when you're starting in a new job, right? Like you got to be trained, right? And but there's also stuff you got to learn on your own, right? So it's a healthy balance because we have some of the veteran players that are there to lean on them if you need them, right? And like you said, a great example is Pat comes in and he's willing to work with new players and he wants to help foster new growth as well. And like that's like you said, the top down is what we've tried to do. We've tried to attract people like that continue to try and pay it forward, right? And I found that you're much like this already as well. Like I've only known you for a few short months, and you're already willing to jump in and help out new players, and and guide them through something that you've already experienced, right? And that's what I mean. That fosters growth, and it's it's just contagious. It catches on, right?
It totally does. I'm a big believer in, what comes around goes around. Um, I was helped as a new player, and I'm still being helped from time to time because I've ultimately only been playing for 3 to 4 months now. Um, so like I was helped. I believe that I'm going to help people that are coming in even newer than me, and I hope in turn in a few months when they have a little bit of experience, they'll help the newbie that is coming in then as well. It's definitely, push it on down the line, and it makes everything better. There's no need to gatekeep. There's no need to try and stop people from, knowing the secrets of the cards, because ultimately you want to have the most fun you can.
Yeah, you make a very good point with that. And speaking of the most fun you can, James, you've been very active on our Discord server, not only in discussions, helping with deck techs, but also, I'm looking at thing. Matt and I mentioned it earlier during the technical difficulties we had earlier on that you've, according to my record here, you've done 13 online games this season of the Legions League, and so walk us through that. Like we haven't had a perspective necessarily about the Legions League. So how's it feel being a new player and not just getting a chance to play in your local community in person, but being able to play against some of the veteran players online through the Legions League?
I love it. I've learned so much about what I want to do, with my decks, about different decks that I want to try and build, about different combos that you can roll. Um, it's really allowed me to learn some of the decks that I don't play as well, because ultimately you can only play so many decks. I know there's totally people that are trying to build all of the decks. I'm sure some of them, like Jacob and whatnot, have enough cards to build a deck from every single warlord. But you can't ultimately learn to play every warlord perfectly. So you really focus on just a couple, and it's through that playing other people that you learn what other decks can do, and really that's where you learn if there might be something else you want to try to do instead of your current deck. Um, and I find that between the people that I play at at the Legion Wednesday nights and the people that I play online that aren't from the Kingston group, use a lot of different decks, use a lot of things different ways. Especially I find that um, obviously I'm playing a number of more experienced players online, so they've had time to learn what different decks do. They've had time, like one of the things that I think that has taken a bit of time for us in Kingston to kind of catch on is how many combos start from you targeting yourself with a target card. Where when you come from Yu-Gi-Oh, when you come from Magic, Pokemon, the only time you ever target yourself is when it's a plus card or when it's an armament card that we use in Legions, right? When it bestows extra attack. In Legions, you don't have that. You actually, there's times where you want to kill your own warrior because it sets off crazy chains, like, you know, in the instance of Ladonza with the Alehouse dwarfs. Killing your own warrior sometimes can be what targets your entire chain. So you're really seeing a lot of those start to bleed into the local community as well, because of some of the people like myself, like Josh, like Cody, getting that experience playing you guys online and realizing that you can do that in this game, that there's so many more tactics available to you than just the straight up aggro attack.
I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up. I haven't really heard that perspective before, and it's really cool to get that fresh take because, yeah, it's like I tried. It's like almost like an onion, right? I tried to build as many layers into the game as possible, and having that interaction, and the ability to create combo and play lines, not just on your turn but on your opponent's turn, by what would sound crazy in other games, but using a card that would normally be a negative to use on yourself, but it then in turn flips it into a positive and starts a process that um, that it creates a different play line and a different strategy, and maybe it's something that turns the engine of the deck on and stuff like. That's a really cool viewpoint, James. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's just all about, it's all about the growth and how how you learn the game, how you look at the game. Um, I'm a very I'm a strategizer. I love to like sometimes when I'm sitting here doing nothing, I'll just shuffle my deck up, pull the top 6 cards and see what I'd be able to do on like a turn 1 damage. Um, and but you don't, until you've actually read all your like actually played all your cards through several times, you don't really get an idea of what um each deck can do, because there's so many of those, of those hidden engines in the decks. And the nice thing I like is that you've made it so they're not all just your renowns and exalteds. Um, you have commons, uncommons, rares that can start the engine to the deck. Um, or they can completely change the state of the board play.
And that's been a very key focus of ours in development, is that we want every card to matter, and a lot of competitive decks um, use majority of like 50 to 55 60% of their deck is common uncommon. um, we always wanted the exalteds to not only be a nice showcase piece or a chase piece, but um, that oftentimes they're just a cog in a greater machine, or that they're in some situations a flashy win more card. And now obviously that changes from deck to deck and legion to legion, and now warlord to warlord. That there's some of those exalted renowns may have a little more weight to them in play, but um, ultimately another way of trying to lower barrier of entry is making it so you can build a competitive deck without the high end shopping cards.
Yeah, which I think is, as a new player, has definitely been key to the growth, because ultimately you don't want to get into a new game, spend $500 building a deck, and then find out that, you know, maybe the deck isn't what you want. Maybe the game isn't what you want. That's just a massive barrier, and you've removed a lot of that, which I think has, again, has just helped that sense of community, because there's not, you know, there's no jealousness when someone pulls a nice card. Everyone is happy. Everyone's hooting and hollering for them. And I think a lot of that is because you don't need those cards to win games. They just happen.
Yeah, and I think that something too important to note, and you touched on it there, was that the aspect of, and maybe we'll take Exalteds for example, right? Um, Unlike other games where uh, you need to get a full playset of your big power piece or of your high end piece, and in Legions we designed it where you're exalted in your deck, you can only run one of that card with that same name, right? So I wanted to ask your opinion on having the rarity based restrictions to card limits in your deck. Do you feel that's also user friendly and new player friendly and ultimately like wallet friendly in that regard as well?
I definitely do, because one thing it's going to mean is it's going to mean that you can't you can't buy just, you know, 3 of every $100 card and stack your deck. It's going to mean that you can't that even the $50 cards, you can't just buy 3 of every $50 cards, because all the renowns are limited to 2, right?
Yeah.
And so I definitely think that helps with um keeping the amount of the high price cards out of the decks, like, because you're not running, you know, you ultimately there's, you know, what, 3 exalteds and renowns for each warlord. So even if you run a copy of every single one, you're still only looking at a couple $100. Um, I know people that have Magic decks that are worth $1,500, $2,000 in cards.
Yeah, and that's
You don't see that. It's nice because it really limits what people can just stack.
yeah, and that's something I've touched on before in older podcasts, and I think I talked about it inside the Creator's Mind episode as well. Um, and James, you probably heard it in discussion as well. And when I talked to you in the Discord, is we the concept of the Queen's Rule, right? You know, functionally, the greatest game ever created was chess. Um, it's a game that, in its entire lifespan, has never needed an expansion. It's never needed to change. It's been almost perfect or almost flawless since the beginning, and that's the dynamic of the certain pieces on the board and their certain purpose in the game, and as a result it bakes in strategy, because certain, just like pieces on the chessboard, if we can make cards limited in some capacity or only allow one movement or one play line, we're building strategy and almost chess into a card game. um, Now, I'm not going to say is go out on a limb and say that we're anything close to the flawlessness of chess, um, but is the fact that, like, what I talk about with the Queen's Rule is that if I gave you a chessboard with unlimited amount of pieces, honestly, you're probably going to choose all queens, right? Because they're the most
Yeah.
powerful piece on the board, right? They have no limitations. So it's the same concept the way I approached when I took it with Legions, is the Queen's Rule being that if you gave access to anyone, an unlimited amount of card pool, no matter how much money they wanted to spend on it, how many boxes they wanted to open, whatever it may be, if you gave them access with no limits to high powered cards compared to low power cards, or high rarity cards compared to low rarity cards, everyone's going to choose the best or most expensive option available, right? And you're just going to choose all queens. right? Or you're just gonna, if Exalteds didn't have a rarity cap or what you were allowed to play, you just choose all Exalteds, right? You just fill your deck with them, right? So that creates a giant paywall, a big barrier to entry, and it creates what you're talking about, that gatekeeping or that elitist mentality. So by initiating what we call the Queen's Rule of, yeah, you can have an Exalted, but you can have one, like a Queen, right? Is that it inherently bakes in strategy, and more thought processing. We find that an intimidating thing for a player. Um, Now, maybe you've experienced this as a player in other games, James, or maybe as a new player coming in. An intimidating to a new player is coming in and you approach a new game like an artist would approach a blank canvas. You come in and the possibilities are endless. The deck building potential is endless. You're almost overwhelmed because it's a blank canvas. You have all the paints in front of you, and you can paint anything you want or any which way you want or use any color you want. Um, the same thing as a new player coming into a new game. There's in our game, for instance, there's 8 different legions and 9 if you count Marianas with the Bounty Realm, um, and all these different play lines within those legions, plus the different warlords within those legions. It could be overwhelming for a new player. But if you give people parameters, just like you give artists the parameters, you're saying, okay, well, this is your blank canvas, but you can only use these colors. Or this is your blank canvas, but you can only paint this object. Same thing as you coming into legions. You can only play one color, or you can only play these warlords. You start creating finite things within that expansive ability to build anything or play anything, and I find that that inspires more creativity because now instead of this overwhelming amount of options, you're in a position where you now have access to, this is the color I chose, this is the warlord I chose. I have still a lot of large varying amount of options, but now I can get creative because there is still limitations.
And and I found too with our group, there was a lot of people who was like, oh, like for example, I picked dwarfs partly because I'm not an overly tall guy. I'm not like super short, but I'm like 5'10", 5'9", so I'm a bit average height, and I've got big, bushy red beard, and I've just always loved the dwarfs. The the general dwarf drink and fight. It's it works well for me when it comes to card games, it comes to fantasy and stuff. So I picked that, but we had a lot of people like some people picked Mythical Beast because no one was running that. Some people picked Angels because no one was running that. So we've got, I think we actually have every single Legion represented in the 20 or 25 people that will show up in Kingston. Um and out of the, because there's now the 19 warlords, I believe. Um, I think, and I think we're at probably about 14 or 15 warlords that are being played. Like last night, there was 10 of us, and I think only 2 people had the same warlord.
Like that's great to see, right? That's great to see the diversity there. And that speaks volumes to me. Like I think I look at that as a great compliment to my design process, because it goes to show that the hard work and the effort is paying off. The fact that we're consistently trying to produce balanced cards and balanced legions, and seeing that diversity in a metagame, and as it's starting to shape and mold and build further, that only bodes well for the future of the game, and once again keeps that barrier of entry low for players. Because as you probably have seen in card games and experienced yourself, when meta decks start to form, um, when when uh, when the game starts to go in a direction that is solely built around a couple decks and a couple key cards, those decks and those cards end up skyrocketing in price, and it becomes a barrier to entry for new players because it now becomes a pay to win situation where I have no chance to win against this deck because I don't have these cards, right? And by keeping everything as balanced as possible and keeping a meta diverse and as open as possible, It allows for obviously more further creativity, more fun, more variety, but keeps that barrier to entry ultimately lower.
And I think one of the things you're finding is ultimately each realm usually has one or two things it's super strong against, one or two other realms it's super strong against, or other warlords it's super good against, one or two other warlords that it is terrible against, that you really have to game plan for that warlord if you're going to beat it. And then ultimately most of them that you're fairly evenly matched. Like last night I went, even though I went 0 for 3, um, literally I lost on the last turn of everyone. We went to turn 0, and then it was on the very last turn that I lost the match each time. And so you're seeing a lot of closer ones as we get to know the cards better, and you're seeing a lot of diversity in the styles that we're playing.
That's great to hear. Like that bodes well for the future, and I would assume you're happy to see that result as well, right?
Oh, 100% I'm happy to see that. It's so nice that you're seeing so many different ones. Ultimately, if all you do is play the same one or two decks nonstop, you're going to get bored of those decks eventually. And if everyone's just playing the same one or two meta decks, you are going to get real bored of those decks real fast. So by
Found
having that diversity, I think you stop that from happening.
exactly, and I found personally that like
I found
you
personally
need to
that like
find what makes you enjoy the game, right? For me, I don't like winning if it's just a free win. It doesn't feel enjoyable on my end. I like something where it's I really have to think about it and play not perfect, but close to, right? That's why I really like Frost Control and Burnforge, because it's all like Burnforge was a very incomplete deck, but that's what I liked it for, is because it was you had to really think about your playlines, and it's you would probably be thinking at least, I don't know, maybe 4 to 6 cards deep in your playlines just to be able to do what you want to do, and it kept it very fresh, and it was in a way that you can, if you lost, it wasn't, oh, I like they're playing better. It's I could have won if I did this, and it's very much a you beat yourself kind of way, which I think can be good for some people if they have the right mindset for it.
Definitely, I've played the cross control, and I love that every single game I found a different move that I could do. And even though I haven't played them in the last, 5, 6, 7 matches I've played because I've been playing Putrid, um, I still think of different things. I still learn different things that I can do watching, other people play other decks. I'm like, ooh, you can target with that ability on yourself and chain these ones together. You can stop yourself from dying by bouncing yourself back to the hand when you have all the melt. Like one of the things that Taylor um, had suggested was like you can, if you have all your warriors on the field, you can use your melt cannon attack and then bounce your own warrior back to the hand so you don't get destroyed. Attach your melt cannon to someone else's attack, bounce back to hand so you don't get destroyed. Um, there's just so many different combinations that you can do that you learn something new every time you either play it or play with it.
Well,
and
exactly.
that must bode well for you as a new player because it that's another thing that you try and focus on as a developer is not just keeping a lower barrier of entry, making a product that people love to open, making a game that people like to play, but replayability is huge, right? It's a trap that board games often fall into, and it's a trap that a pitfall you try to avoid as a trading card game, is you want to keep replayability as high as possible. And how do you do that? You add variety and variance into things, right? And just like you were saying, James, if it's the same meta decks all the time, you get bored of it real quick. It diminishes the replayability of the product, right? So ultimately, when you're playing, that replayability when you're excited because every time you play you found out a different play line or a different thing, or your opponent put you in a position where you didn't think you'd end up in, and you're able to figure out a way out of it. And I think that bodes well to the intellectual mind, and it allows you to become even more of a critical thinker. It helps you strategize, like you said, your strategic mind. And so, what do you think about that in terms of like aiding the process of replayability?
I think the decks have a lot of replayability. I'm actually tempted to at some point go back through and create more of a Blast Forge frost control deck, because I think with that melt hammer, I think it was the card that was added in Empires, and the blacksmith, they can search for or the forger, they can search for armament cards, um would be a real boon to the Blast Forge deck. Um and and like I said, there's so many ways I've thought about how that deck can be played different now that I've thought about targeting my own cards with some of the bounce back effects instead of just opponents, where it could really it could really change everything. How you like everything about how you handle the deck. Um and so I think you've added a lot of replayability with Empires. I think it was an amazing set, and I don't think anyone is disappointed with it at all.
That's great to hear. It's definitely a set that we're very proud of. We're proud of everything we've done to this point, but I think Empires is, or at least from the feedback I've got in the first 2 weeks, basically, that this is the best product, the best set that we've produced to date, and that's great to hear coming in being in our year two, that we've reached that point. But now the challenge falls on me more to at least match, if not try to surpass Empires. The goal is to always try and be better, right? So, so speaking of trying to be better, James, is there anything particular that you found that, like I said, that feedback is critical? Is there anything that you found that maybe Empires might have been lacking, or things that maybe you'd like to see in future products that Empires didn't offer, or maybe is something that you liked in Empires that you'd like us to repeat or liked us to continue doing? Is there anything specific wise as a new player?
I can say in terms of like the playability, in terms of the strategy of the game, one thing I would like to see more built into some of the other decks is some like natural negates, both for fortified or unified, um, for some of the decks that don't have as much interaction with the other player right now. Like I find some of the decks you need a more of the bounty negates, but I also know that there's, you plan ahead and there's sets coming. So I know there's probably a lot of those pieces that, as a player you see that are missing now that you have planned for future sets. Um, Other than that, though, like the actual product, I like how you spaced it out. I like that there was the chance for the hidden drops in some of them, that there were some, even some second edition exalteds that got redropped and stuff, right? So I really liked a lot of that. I think that added a great playability to a lot of those cards that people never had initially. And like as a player, from the player perspective, like from the collector's perspective, you want that first edition card, right? But
Yeah.
I'm a player. I'm not really in it to collect. I'm in it to enjoy my Wednesday nights, to play the game. I would like to eventually make it around to getting into a competitive tournament over the next year or two. Um, but I think from the playable side of things, I'd like to see that. From the collector side of things, I think that you really didn't lose any collectability at all with the second edition hidden drops because people are still collecting those as well. Most of them aren't even like most of them haven't even really been devalued from the first edition because they're such playable cards that there's still lots of people looking for them.
And that in our first set, Ravage Lands, where these reprints are coming from, was our smallest print run, right? And it was in the game's infancy, so there really wasn't many of them out there. I believe, Matt, actually you have an actual breakdown of how many Exalteds from Ravage Lands you believe are out there, right?
It wasn't it 1,600 boxes?
Ravage Lands was only printed for 1,600 boxes only. Yeah.
So I think the math ended up being 40 Exalteds of each, roughly.
Yeah, 50.
No,
Yeah.
40.
40.
Because it's
well, you gotta factor in the packs that came in the battle decks as well, right? So
oh, true, yeah. So it'd probably be closer to 50.
So yeah,
Roughly.
when you think about it, if it's roughly 50 of each Exalted out there, right? And some people have a couple that they hold on to, or the people that are just collecting them, or maybe they're still sitting in some sealed boxes of collections of people on their shelves, right? So like going off of what James said there, we felt as though that limited amount of those higher end pieces felt it necessary to print them in a second edition so that players much like yourself, James, had access to cards that you wouldn't otherwise have access to.
I think we
Yeah, no, I think it was really important. I think it brought back in a lot of playability from those cards because they were suddenly popping up in more places than they'd been before.
exactly. Until I was gonna say, I think we know a certain person who's likes to keep playsets of the Ravage Lands Exalteds, multiple playsets.
Yeah, and that's what I mean is that we've been open and honest with the community and we've been very transparent from the beginning that all of our products, when they're produced, yes, they say first edition on them, but there's no intent of producing a second edition version of that released product. And as you've seen from our willingness to reprint cards, we saw some updated alternate art reprints show up in Bountiful Harvest and also in Frontiers. But if we reprint the same card with the same artwork, the first time it's ever been seen was in our just most recent set, Empires on the Rise. We produced it with the silver shield crest to represent that it is second edition. And that's how we plan on rolling products going forward, is the fact that booster boxes or set release boxes will never see a second edition print run. It'll only ever see its calendar year run. And then at that point, the product goes officially out of print. Each product from the time they're released, so in this case, July 14th, Empires on the Rise was released. When we reach July 14th of 2024, Empires on the Rise will no longer be in print production. So every set has not necessarily a shelf life, but every set has a year timeline for its print run existence. And after that, that way we maintain collectability within the sealed product and maintain collectability within the cards, but we won't hesitate to reprint essential game pieces as time goes on in a second edition treatment in another first edition product. And we just use it the same way we did with Empires of Rise as hidden drops. Now, I will say that the hidden drops that come in Empires in the Rise in terms of the second edition synergies, as well as the second edition Exalteds from Ravaged Lands, that will be now the only time that they ever get printed again. So in that form. So that is important to note that they had their first edition and they got their second edition. There will be no third edition of those cards. So every essential piece or every sought after card in a way will will see its second kick at the can, and then that's it.
But that isn't. I think it's also important to mention that that's not the only time that card will ever be seen. It's just that variant.
Correct. And we saw that firsthand with the Twilight Gardens and Void Hollow, right?
Exactly.
So they still maintain their first edition Shield Crest because they were extended alternate art versions of the original. So that way the original still maintains its value for being still functionally the same card, but aesthetically different card.
Exactly.
So Matt, do you have any questions for James?
I do not actually. I think this has gone very smoothly once the tech started working out. Do you have any questions for him?
I think I've asked for a decent amount thus far. James, do you have anything that you'd like to ask me? Is there anything particular that you think the player base that you play with or the audience listening would like to know? Anything that you personally would like to know? Is there anything that you want to ask me in terms of decision making with sets or the empires or anything going forward?
Not overly. I think we've had a really good discussion. It's been nice getting on and talking about what we've started to build here in Kingston, and touching on the Discord as well. I hope lots more people get into the Discord battles. They're amazingly fun, and it helps you see a lot more decks than what you would see otherwise.
Exactly.
And a lot more experienced players. I know I've played Matt a few times. His Alehouse deck is deadly.
I would not say that, but thank you.
It's fun, and ultimately you only learn the game through experience. So I think that's one of the things that's really helped me with is it's just simply giving me more experience to know what I want to do, to know what kind of decks I want to build, and go from there.
Exactly, and I think that's. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that's a really big statement there, James. Is that for someone who is working hard at that learning the combos, learning the play lines, learning new decks, and working your way up that competition ladder. When the Legions League online season concludes and before we start the next season, we'll see where you fall in the ranking. You're doing really well right now, and prizes will be awarded out and shipped out to people for competing in the Legions League. So it is free to sign up for anyone listening. Sign up and play some games in the Discord. You get points for wins and losses, so you get actually awarded. The more games you play, the more points you accumulate anyways. So whether they're wins or losses, you might be able to climb the leaderboard just for playing more games. So it's really important for us to work on continuing getting the community involved and that growth. And for someone like yourself, James, who's working towards climbing that competitive ladder, I'm in talks with Cody. We have been for the past month or so about setting up our next level of competition, our Siege Series events, to take place at the Legion Branch 560 in Kingston. So we're working on dates for the fall, and as soon as we get one hammered down, agreements with the Legion and the room booked, we'll be making an announcement, both Cody and myself, and we'll be bringing a Siege Series to Kingston. So
I will definitely be there when it happens. I hope everyone gets out to play their legions each week, and everyone gets into the Discord league, because it's still fairly new. There's only so many people in it right now, so this is the time to get into it. You can learn the game, you can learn how to run the league now, while it's still new enough that we're all figuring out things at the same time. And then by the time it starts to get bigger, you'll be experienced and know what to play against each.
That's true. Yeah, it's very true. We're at 13 players in this season, which is already growth from last season. Last season we had 10 players, so we're already +3 in that regard. So that's great to see that growth already just online. And obviously, James, you said earlier, 20 to 24 people in the Kingston area playing at any given time, or if at all at one point. Um, I remember when I made the trip there that we had quite the turnout. I believe we had like 22 people there on the week, the
20,
first.
24 that night,
Oh, 20
plus you
24
guys.
that night.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was just over 25 adding you and Paul. I think it was 26 with both of you guys added. So it was 24 that night.
That's amazing, right? So like, I think, see, like that kind of growth that fosters a great community, right? So if we can get that kind of turnout for a Siege series, and then add the player groups that we have at Nerds and Atlas and in Toronto and stuff, and have them all attend as well. If we can get a Siege series of 35, 40, 45 players, I think that'd be really amazing, and an outstanding turnout with some great prize reports and a great time to be had all around. So that's something I really look forward to, of that continued community growth.
No, exactly.
And it'll be nice supporting you. You come out for the day once it's announced and support the Legion. Um, I'm sure we can work up something with the guys that run the dining room there. They're part of the group. They're pretty awesome guys. And yeah, have a fun day.
Oh yeah, for sure. We'll put on something like we did, similar to the last time we visited the Legion, and we'll get either some draws or some silent auctions, or I mean, all proceeds 100% will go back to the Legion, for just supporting us and allowing us to use this great space, and ultimately giving back to the Royal Canadian Legion, the one support Canadian patriotism. So I think all in all, we have a great situation brewing here, and um, we are Canada's TCG, and we're going to keep pushing. And it doesn't mean we won't go beyond, because we will. Um, and for those of you listening to this podcast right now, this is the one that airs after Gen Con, like we mentioned in the first part of the podcast. So just because you're Canada's TCG didn't mean we didn't just do one hell of a weekend in the United States. So if you haven't seen them yet, go and check out social media posts, check out Riot Guy McFly's channel, check out the Legion's YouTube channel that you're on listening to this podcast right now. Check out the pictures and the social media, the video logs that we're going to be doing, or that we have done at this point. And almost like you were there with us. So it's just the next step of growth. It's the next link in the chain as we keep going along. And I'll let you know that we keep working hard. We're going to have some great competition coming up in the fall. And sooner or later, next year we'll get here, and Opus the Magi will be right around the corner at that point. So
And
Exactly.
if you see them at Gen Con, make sure to stop by their booth and learn the game. Ask Taylor about some of the lore. The lore behind the game is absolutely amazing.
Exactly. And with that, I think that's a sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
I was just say I appreciate it, James. I appreciate you coming on to talk with us, and thanks for working through the technical difficulties. I know you wanted to be part of this, and we're really glad to have you, and we'll
No, it's
definitely
amazing.
bringing you back on as well.
And with that, I think that's a great place to end it. So thank you guys all for listening, and thank you, James, for coming on. And I will
Thank you for having me.
no anytime, and I will see you guys next time in the lounge.